The auditorium buzzed like a restless hive, students shifting in their seats, whispering, waiting for the principal to make her grand entrance. Veronica Stevens thrived in moments like this. She walked with deliberate clicks of her heels across the polished wooden floor, every step echoing authority, her cream-colored suit pressed to perfection, her expression a mask of cold command. She was not a woman to be questioned, and she reminded her students of that fact at every assembly. Her sharp blue eyes scanned the room until they landed on one figure standing awkwardly near the back. Jasmine Carter, a quiet black girl with a stitched-up backpack and shoes that had long since lost their shine. Jasmine wasn't sitting with the others, her posture tense, her small hands gripping the strap of her bag as though it were a lifeline. Principal Stevens' voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "Miss Carter," she barked, the syllables stretched with disdain. "Why aren't you seated like everyone else? Do you think you're somehow special?" The room went still, the weight of every gaze swinging toward Jasmine. A ripple of snickers spread across the rows of students. Jasmine's face flushed and she shifted nervously. I can't sit down right now," she whispered, her voice almost swallowed by the silence. Her words only fueled the cruelty in the air. A group of boys laughed loudly, their mocking faces turned to each other as if Jasmine's discomfort were entertainment. Veronica's lips curled into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "Can't sit down?" she repeated, dripping with sarcasm. "What's the matter? Too proud to follow the same rules as everyone else?" Jasmine shook her head quickly, the shame burning hotter inside her. She wanted to explain about the pain still lingering in her back from an accident she kept secret, but she knew it would be useless. People like Principal Stevens never listened. They only judged. That was when Veronica's eyes caught something beside Jasmine. The violin case leaning against the wall. It belonged to Aisha Robinson, Jasmine's best friend and a gifted musician. But the principal either didn't care or chose to ignore that detail. She picked up the violin with a calculated motion, then thrust it into Jasmine's hands. "Since you seem so eager to stand apart, Miss Carter, you'll now stand in front of everyone," she declared, her voice booming. "At our upcoming spring concert, you will perform a violin solo, 3 minutes minimum." The auditorium erupted in laughter and whispers. Everyone knew Jasmine had never once played the violin. She wasn't in the orchestra, wasn't even part of the music club. This was no invitation. It was a sentence. Jasmine froze, the weight of the violin pressing against her chest like a cruel burden. Her lips trembled. "But I've never played before," she stammered, her words nearly drowned by the chorus of mockery around her. Principal Stevens' smile sharpened into something venomous. "Then you'd better learn quickly. Your alternative is detention every day until the semester ends. The choice is yours." And with that, she pivoted on her heel, striding away as though she had delivered justice instead of humiliation. Jasmine stood rooted to the spot, clutching the violin as laughter and whispers surrounded her. Her throat tightened, her eyes stung, but she refused to cry, not here, not in front of them. Still, her heart pounded with the unbearable weight of shame. "This is the worst day of my life," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. She could already see the concert in her mind, the stage lights glaring, hundreds of eyes watching, and her, fumbling and failing, the school laughing harder than ever. What Principal Stevens intended was clear. It wasn't about discipline. It was about breaking her. Yet in that lowest moment, something stirred inside Jasmine, a quiet ember of defiance. She didn't know how to play, that much was true, but she also knew she couldn't let the principal win by watching her crumble. She held the violin tighter, her small fingers tracing the polished wood, and for the first time that day she wondered, what if humiliation wasn't her only destiny? What if this very challenge became the chance to prove them all wrong? And so began a journey none of them could have predicted. One that would turn shame into triumph, cruelty into applause, and a so-called punishment into the very performance that would leave the entire school, including Principal Veronica Stevens, utterly speechless. The corridors of Westridge High were alive with cruel whispers. Wherever Jasmine walked, she felt the weight of eyes on her, the smirks, the muffled laughter. "Violin girl," some of them sneered, while others hummed out-of-tune strings just to mock her. By the third day, she was ready to crawl into herself and disappear. Yet she held on to the borrowed violin like it was both curse and shield. Every time she thought of handing it back, Principal Stevens' words rang in her ears. Perform or suffer detention every day until the semester ends. At home, Jasmine tried to hide her misery. Her mother, exhausted from working double shifts at the diner, already carried enough weight on her shoulders. Jasmine didn't want to add more. She pretended to focus on homework, but when her mother wasn't looking, she opened the violin case and stared at the instrument. Her younger brother Caleb noticed one night. "Are you really going to play that?" he asked softly, curiosity shining in his big brown eyes. Jasmine sighed. "I have no choice." Caleb tilted his head. "But maybe it's not so bad. Didn't Dad used to play something like that?" The words hit Jasmine like a spark. Their father, gone too soon, had once been a musician. She remembered faint memories, the warm hum of strings, the way his hands danced across instruments, the glow in his face when music filled their small apartment. She had forgotten how much of him was tied to sound. Suddenly, the violin didn't feel only like a weapon meant to humiliate her. It felt like a thread pulling her back to him. That night, after everyone was asleep, Jasmine tucked herself into the corner of her room with the violin. She didn't know how to read notes or even hold the bow properly, but she let instinct guide her. At first it was awful. Screeches, squeals, sounds so sharp even Caleb groaned in his sleep. Tears stung her eyes, frustration rising, but she kept going. Something inside told her this was worth the pain. Each night afterward she practiced secretly, fumbling, scratching, but improving bit by bit. At school, the humiliation continued. Principal Stevens seemed to enjoy reminding everyone of Jasmine's upcoming debut, smiling in staff meetings as if she had created entertainment for the whole school. Even some teachers laughed along, but there were a few who saw the cruelty. Mr. Harris, the janitor who always had kind eyes, and Mrs. Lee, the librarian who gave Jasmine a stack of beginner violin books without saying a word. Quiet acts of kindness became fuel for her courage. Then came the day Aisha, her best friend, found out. Jasmine had hidden her practice for weeks, but Aisha discovered her sitting under the bleachers with the violin, bow in hand, her face tight with concentration. "Jazz, you've been learning?" Aisha whispered, shocked. Jasmine lowered the bow quickly, embarrassed. "Don't laugh at me." But Aisha didn't laugh. Instead, she sat beside her and said, "If you're serious, let me help you. My mom gives lessons. We can practice together." For the first time since the humiliation began, Jasmine felt a small crack of hope. Together in Aisha's room after school, the two girls worked. Aisha corrected Jasmine's grip, taught her scales, and encouraged her when the notes wobbled. Days stretched into weeks, and slowly Jasmine's sound grew clearer, warmer, steadier. The violin no longer screamed, it began to sing. But Principal Stevens wasn't finished. 2 weeks before the concert, she called Jasmine to her office. Sitting behind her polished desk, she folded her hands with a cruel smile. "I hope you've been practicing, Miss Carter. The entire community will be attending. Parents, faculty, donors. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself in front of them, would you?" Jasmine's stomach twisted, but she lifted her chin. "I won't embarrass myself," she said quietly. For the first time, Stevens blinked at her, as though the timid girl she mocked was gone and someone new had taken her place. That night, Jasmine practiced longer than ever. The music filled her tiny apartment, waking Caleb, who sat on the couch and listened with wide eyes. He didn't laugh this time. Instead, he clapped softly when she finished. "Dad would be proud," he whispered. Jasmine smiled through tears she didn't bother to hide. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt it too. The concert was drawing closer, and though the world still doubted her, Jasmine was no longer afraid. What began as a punishment was slowly transforming into something powerful. She was ready to turn the stage Principal Stevens had meant for her humiliation into the very place where she would rise. The days leading up to the spring concert moved like a storm cloud, dark, heavy, full of whispers. Everywhere Jasmine went, students snickered and made cruel jokes. "Better bring earplugs," one boy laughed as she walked past the cafeteria. "She's gonna break every window in this place," another girl added. Their words cut deep, but Jasmine refused to show it. She gripped her violin case tighter and kept walking. Inside, her stomach churned with fear, but she had also discovered something new, a quiet determination she didn't know she had. Each night she practiced until her fingers ached. She replayed scales over and over, learning how to coax warmth from the strings instead of screeches. Aisha stayed by her side, correcting her bow strokes and clapping whenever Jasmine got through a full passage without faltering. Even Caleb sat on the floor with his toy cars, humming along to her music as though it were already something beautiful. Those small moments were her strength. But Principal Stevens wasn't content with waiting for Jasmine's humiliation to play out. She began adding pressure, reminding her in assemblies that the entire school and parents would be there. "I hope you're prepared, Miss Carter," she said one morning, her voice carrying through the auditorium. "We don't want the night ruined by sloppy playing." Students laughed. Jasmine's cheeks burned, but she stood taller than before. She was no longer the girl who wanted to vanish. Something inside her had changed. The evening before the concert, Jasmine felt nerves twist her insides so tightly she could barely eat dinner. Her mother, noticing her pale face, sat beside her. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Jasmine hesitated, then told her everything: the punishment, the humiliation, the practice. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Jasmine," she whispered, pulling her into an embrace. "Your father would have said the same thing I will. Don't let anyone decide your worth. Play from your heart. That's all that matters." Jasmine clung to her mother, the violin case resting on her lap, as if it carried the weight of her father's spirit too. The day of the concert arrived. The school gymnasium had been transformed into a glowing hall filled with parents, teachers, and rows of students dressed in neat uniforms. Lights shone down on the polished stage, reflecting off the instruments arranged for the orchestra. Jasmine stood backstage, her hands trembling as she clutched the violin. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared the audience could hear it. "Don't worry," Aisha whispered, squeezing her hand. "You're ready. Trust yourself." Jasmine nodded, though her throat was dry and her knees felt weak. She peeked through the curtain. The crowd was larger than she imagined. Donors sat in the front row alongside faculty and community leaders, and there, standing tall and proud in the middle, was Principal Stevens, her expression icy and confident, certain of the spectacle to come. The orchestra played first, their music filling the gym with crisp, practiced sound. Applause followed, polite and rhythmic. Then came the moment Jasmine had dreaded. Principal Stevens stepped forward to the microphone. "And now," she announced, her voice smooth with anticipation, "we present a very special performance. Jasmine Carter, please come to the stage." The room went silent. Whispers rose like rustling leaves as Jasmine walked across the stage, violin in hand. She felt the heat of hundreds of eyes on her. Her palms were slick with sweat, her bow nearly slipping from her grasp. She could hear faint chuckles in the audience, already expecting her to fail. She took her place under the blinding stage lights. For a moment, fear threatened to swallow her whole. Her chest tightened, her breath caught, and she almost wished she could run away. But then, in the silence, she remembered Caleb's small voice. Dad would be proud. She remembered her mother's embrace. She remembered every night of practice, every tear, and every moment she refused to give up. Jasmine lifted the violin to her shoulder. Her bow touched the strings. The first sound quivered, shaky, almost collapsing. A ripple of laughter spread through the room, her vision blurred with tears, but she held her ground. She breathed, steadied her hand, and tried again. This time the note was clear, strong, ringing through the hall like a bell. The laughter stopped. The music began to flow, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. Jasmine closed her eyes and let her father's memory guide her. Her bow moved faster, surer, her fingers dancing across the strings as if they had always known where to go. The hall filled with sound, not mockery, not chaos, but beauty. The cruel whispers faded. The audience leaned forward, stunned. Principal Stevens, arms crossed, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This wasn't the disaster she had planned. This wasn't humiliation. It was something else entirely. As Jasmine played, the world around her melted away. It was no longer about punishment or fear. It was about her, her father, her family, her resilience. The music swelled, lifting higher and higher until it filled every corner of the room. For the first time, Jasmine felt free. And when the final note lingered in the air, silence fell. Not a mocking silence, but a stunned, breathless one. Jasmine opened her eyes slowly, her chest heaving, her hands shaking, but she stood tall. The crowd stared back at her, caught between disbelief and awe. And then, someone clapped, then another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted in applause, louder and stronger than Jasmine had ever imagined. Students who once mocked her now cheered, parents rose to their feet, and the sound of admiration washed over her like a tide. Principal Stevens did not clap. Her jaw was tight, her hands frozen in her lap. But nothing she did could stop what had just happened. Jasmine had turned her punishment into a triumph. She had silenced an entire room with the voice of her violin, and for the first time in her life, she knew she was more powerful than their cruelty. The thunder of applause still echoed in Jasmine's ears long after she left the stage. She stood in the dim hallway backstage, clutching her violin against her chest, her body trembling. Not from fear this time, but from something she had never felt before. Power, relief, joy. Tears streamed down her cheeks as Aisha ran up and threw her arms around her. "You did it, Yasmi. You did it," she whispered fiercely, her own eyes wet. Jasmine could barely speak. For so long she had prepared herself for laughter, but instead she had brought an entire hall to its feet. Out front, the audience was still buzzing. Parents whispered to each other about the young girl they had underestimated. Some teachers exchanged guilty looks, remembering how they had smirked when the punishment was announced. The air was heavy with the knowledge that something extraordinary had just happened. But one face in the crowd remained rigid: Principal Stevens. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. This was not the spectacle she had planned. She had expected shame, not triumph, and the fact that Jasmine had risen so far in front of everyone gnawed at her pride like fire. When the concert ended and families filled the hall, Jasmine walked carefully through the crowd. Parents she had never spoken to before stopped her, smiling. "That was beautiful," one said. Another leaned down to shake her hand. "You have a gift, young lady." Jasmine's cheeks flushed with shy gratitude. She wasn't used to praise. She had lived so long in the shadows that the sudden light felt overwhelming. Still, it warmed her heart to feel seen, really seen, for the first time. Caleb rushed to her side, beaming. "You were amazing, Jazz," he said proudly. Their mother stood behind him, tears glistening in her eyes. She pulled Jasmine into a tight embrace. "Your father is smiling tonight," she whispered into her ear. Jasmine pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, letting the weight of those words sink deep. For once, the ache of her loss felt lighter. Music had brought him back, if only for a moment. But the celebration didn't last long. As the crowd thinned, Principal Stevens appeared, her heels clicking like gunshots on the polished floor. Her face was tight with forced composure, but her eyes burned cold. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "A word, please." The chatter around them dimmed. Jasmine's chest tightened as she followed the principal into the hallway. Stevens turned on her, folding her arms. "I don't know what tricks you pulled tonight," she said bitterly, "but don't think one performance changes anything. You embarrassed me by disobeying the role I assigned you. Don't expect special treatment because you got lucky." Jasmine's lips parted in shock. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but her courage faltered. Then something unexpected happened. Mr. Harris, the janitor who had always treated her with quiet kindness, stepped into the hall. He had been nearby, listening. "With respect, Principal Stevens," he said gently, "that girl didn't embarrass you. She made this school proud. If you can't see that, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." Stevens stiffened, her face reddening. "You're out of line," she hissed. But before she could say more, Mrs. Lee, the librarian, joined them. She adjusted her glasses, her tone calm but firm. "He's right. Tonight was extraordinary. Jasmine deserves recognition, not scorn." For the first time, Jasmine saw fear flicker in the principal's eyes. The tide was turning, and she could feel it. Stevens muttered something under her breath and stormed away, her heels clicking furiously down the hall. Jasmine stood frozen, her violin still in her hands, staring at the two adults who had defended her. Mrs. Lee placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have something rare, Jasmine. Don't let anyone make you feel small again. Promise me." Jasmine nodded, though tears blurred her vision. Word of Jasmine's performance spread quickly in the following days. Students who had once mocked her now approached her in the hallways, some with apologies, others with admiration. "I didn't know you could play like that," one girl admitted. "It was beautiful." Jasmine accepted their words with quiet grace, but inside she remembered their laughter. He hadn't forgotten. Respect, she realized, wasn't something freely given. It was something earned, sometimes in the hardest ways. By the end of the week, the local newspaper had written a short piece on the concert mentioning the breathtaking solo from student Jasmine Carter. For her family, it was a moment of pride they had never imagined. But for Principal Stevens, it was salt in an open wound. Each word of praise for Jasmine was another reminder of how her plan to humiliate a student had backfired spectacularly. Jasmine didn't yet know how far the consequences would ripple or how fiercely Stevens would fight to regain control. But she did know one thing. She had found her voice, and nothing, not fear, not ridicule, not cruelty, could take it away again. By Monday morning, Westridge High buzzed with talk of the concert. Students huddled in corners of the hallways, replaying Jasmine's performance in whispers of awe. Teachers who had looked down on her now spoke her name with reluctant respect. For the first time, Jasmine walked through the school without feeling invisible. Yet with every step she took, she could also feel the heavy gaze of Principal Stevens burning into her back. Veronica Stevens hated nothing more than losing control, and Jasmine's triumph had made her look foolish. In her mind, the school was about order, discipline, appearances. A poor black girl from a struggling family was never supposed to outshine the polished students of privilege. But Jasmine had. And that humiliation, played out in front of parents, donors, and colleagues, was something Stevens would not forgive easily. In class that week, Stevens found reasons to target Jasmine. A late homework assignment earned harsher punishment than others. A forgotten pencil became a lecture about responsibility. Students noticed the unfairness, murmuring among themselves. Even those who had once mocked Jasmine now shifted uncomfortably, realizing the cruelty wasn't about discipline at all, it was about revenge. But Jasmine refused to shrink back into silence. Each time Stevens tried to belittle her, she stood straighter, her voice steady. One day, after being accused of daydreaming, Jasmine calmly replied, "I'm just thinking about what piece to practice next." The class chuckled softly, and Stevens' face hardened. Jasmine had learned that courage didn't always roar. It sometimes spoke with quiet defiance. Outside the classroom, Jasmine's story reached further than anyone expected. The newspaper article caught the attention of a local music academy. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her home, inviting her to audition for a scholarship program. Jasmine held the paper in trembling hands, unable to believe what she was reading. Her mother pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Do you see, sweetheart? What others meant for harm, God turned into a door for you." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. She wasn't just surviving Stevens' cruelty, she was beginning to rise beyond it. Word of the invitation spread quickly through the school. Some students cheered her on, others grew jealous, but all agreed on one thing: Principal Stevens had been wrong. Even teachers began questioning her judgment more openly. At the next staff meeting, Mrs. Lee spoke up. "We should be encouraging Jasmine. What she achieved was remarkable." Stevens' lips thinned. "We cannot let one performance distract us from maintaining standards," she snapped, but her words rang hollow. The real breaking point came when the school board got wind of the story. Parents had written letters praising Jasmine and questioning the principal's methods. At first, it was just a trickle, but within days, it became a flood. They wanted to know why a student with no formal training had been forced into a solo in front of hundreds of people. They wanted to know why that same student had flourished in spite of it. not because of support, but in spite of cruelty. Stevens grew desperate. She called Jasmine into her office once again, her tone icy. You may think you've impressed people, but this school is not about individual glory. It's about rules. Remember that, Miss Carter. Jasmine, clutching her violin case, looked her straight in the eye. Respect is earned, Principal Stevens, and you lost it the moment you tried to humiliate me. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, but she didn't regret them. For once, the balance of power had shifted. That evening, Jasmine practiced harder than ever. The audition was only 2 weeks away, and she poured every ounce of her heart into the strings. Caleb sat nearby, watching proudly, while their mother whispered encouragement from the kitchen. The music wasn't just sound anymore. It was survival, hope, and defiance woven together. Each note told the story of a girl who refused to be broken. At school the next day, whispers grew louder. Rumors swirled that the school board was investigating Stevens. Some said donors were furious that a principal could use humiliation as punishment. Others said parents threatened to pull their children from the school if changes weren't made. Jasmine didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time she felt she wasn't alone. The girl who once stood trembling at the back of the auditorium had become something more, a symbol, proof that resilience could outshine cruelty. Proof that respect couldn't be forced, but earned through courage. And though the storm was far from over, Jasmine was ready to face it, with her violin in hand and her voice finally heard. The tension at Westridge High had grown too heavy to ignore. Students whispered in classrooms, teachers avoided Principal Stevens' glare, and parents filled the office with calls demanding answers. The school board had scheduled a special meeting and everyone knew why. Jasmine's name was on every lip, and her story had become bigger than one performance. It was now a question of justice. On the day of the meeting, Jasmine sat in the front row with her mother and Caleb beside her. Her violin rested in her lap, the wood warm beneath her hands. The gymnasium was crowded, parents, teachers, students, all waiting to hear what would be decided. Principal Stevens stood at the podium, her smile tight, her shoulders stiff. She tried to begin with confidence, but her voice wavered under the weight of so many eyes. This school, she declared, is built on discipline and order. Rules must be enforced, even when students don't like them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A father raised his hand. Enforced how? He asked firmly. By humiliation? By setting up a child to fail? Others chimed in. My daughter came home in tears after watching what you did to Jasmine. What lesson were you trying to teach, Principal Stevens? That cruelty is leadership? The principal's face reddened. She opened her mouth to respond, but Mrs. Lee stepped forward from the teachers' section. Her calm voice carried across the room. Respect is not built through fear. It is built through fairness. What Jasmine achieved wasn't because of support. It was in spite of being set up to fail. That is not leadership. That is abuse of power. Applause broke out. Even some students clapped, their voices rising in agreement. Stevens tried to protest, but the school board chair raised his hand for silence. We've reviewed the letters, spoken to staff, and heard from the community. It is clear your actions did not reflect the values of this school. His voice grew firm. Effective immediately, Veronica Stevens, you are relieved of your duties as principal. A gasp spread through the room. Stevens froze, her face drained of color. She tried to speak, but the board chair continued. We need leaders who uplift our students, not humiliate them. The board will appoint an interim principal until a replacement is found. With that, the decision was sealed. Jasmine's mind sat frozen, her heart pounding. She had never imagined this day would come. The woman who tried to break her was gone, and the community had stood by her instead. Caleb grabbed her hand, whispering, You did it, Jazz. You really did it. Their mother's eyes shone with tears, her hand pressed to her chest as though her heart might burst. When the meeting ended, people crowded around Jasmine. Students thanked her for inspiring them. Parents shook her hand. You gave our kids courage, one mother said warmly. Reporters even asked for a comment, their cameras flashing. Jasmine, overwhelmed, simply said, I just wanted to play from my heart. It was all she needed to say. 2 weeks later, Jasmine walked into the audition hall of the local music academy. Her stomach churned with nerves, but when she lifted her violin and began to play, The fear melted away. She poured her story into the strings, the laughter, the tears, the nights of practice, the memory of her father, the pride of her mother. The music rose and fell like her journey, fierce and gentle, aching and triumphant. When she finished, silence filled the room once more, followed by applause. Days later, the letter arrived. "Congratulations. You have been awarded a full scholarship." Jasmine screamed with joy, hugging her mother so tightly they both cried. Caleb danced around the room chanting, "My sister's a star." For the first time, Jasmine felt her future open wide, like a horizon filled with light. Back at Westridge, students still remembered that night on stage. The story of the quiet black girl who was forced to play as a joke but stunned the entire school became legend. It was retold, not with laughter, but with pride. And for every student who felt small, it became a reminder: dignity can't be stolen, and respect comes when you refuse to bow to cruelty. Jasmine stood one afternoon at the back of the same auditorium where it all began, the violin case in her hands. She looked out at the rows of empty seats and smiled. She remembered trembling under those lights, but now the memory no longer hurt. It shone. She whispered softly as if her father could hear, "I didn't just play for them. I played for us." And with that, Jasmine Carter walked forward into a life that no cruelty could cage again. Her music no longer punishment, but her power, her voice, her victory.